So heat is a form of energy. And like all energy, it can move from one place to another. Or heat, like all energies, can be transferred from one point to another. Now when heat is transferred, it can actually happen in three different ways. The first way is convection. The second way is conduction. And the third way is radiation. So convection is basically when particles are heated up and they actually move. So we've got a fire here, and we can imagine that there are air particles just above the fire. Here's some air particles. And now when they're heated by the fire, they move upwards. The actual particles which have, are energized by the heat, they move upwards. If you put your hands above the fire, it's quite hot. If you put your hands down here below the fire, you'll find that it's quite cold. That's because all of the heat energy is moving upwards via convection. And you can see this kind of thing in the ocean. Warm water will move upwards and cold water will move downwards. So that's heat transfer via convection. The actual particles, they themselves, which are energized with the heat, they move and they always move upwards. Now the other type of heat transfer here is conduction. So this is where the heat energy, so if you hold this is a metal poker, if you hold a metal poker near a fire, this end of the metal poker will get really, really hot, but you'll actually find that the heat also conducts itself along this metal rod to your hand, and your hand, unless you're wearing a glove like this smart person, your hand will get really, really hot too. So over here I've got an example of what's happening with the actual particles involved. So when the particles, let's say this is the metal rod, the particles closest to the heat, well, they'll get that heat energy and they'll actually vibrate or move faster. So I'll draw some these little vibration lines here. And then because they're vibrating, they'll push into the particles next to them and they'll vibrate. And then the particles next to them will vibrate, and then the particles next to them, particles next to them. And so the energy, the heat energy will travel, or it will conduct along that metal pipe to the other end. The particles themselves don't move, but the energy, that heat energy, will be conducted along the metal pipe. So that's, conduction is where the heat energy moves along, but the particles themselves stay where they are. And some things are better conductors of heat than others. So metal is a really great conductor of heat. The heat will really move quite quickly along a metal pipe or something like that. Now the third type of heat transfer is down here. This is radiation. So I won't cross it out there. Is radiation. So this involves heat transfer with no particles. So convection was a movement of the actual particles. So hot air rises, moves up. Conduction is the particles all vibrate and pass the heat along. Radiation is heat traveling through anything, a vacuum. So the energy or the heat energy from the sun, and if you've ever stood outside on a hot day, it's quite a lot of heat energy, that travels from the sun all the way to Earth via radiation. So it travels through the vacuum of space. So it travels via electromagnetic radiation. And over here I've actually got an infrared. So this is an image taken with infrared radiation, and it shows where the heat is being emitted from. So this is some kind of a lemur or something, some small mammal. It's in a tree, and you can see, so the more orangey yellow it is, the hotter it is. So you can see that this animal here is emitting quite a lot of heat, and the dark areas is where there's no heat. So dark purpley black. So this area there's no heat coming from here, and this shows that radiation heat in the form of infrared radiation is coming from the mammal in this case to the camera, and it's showing that is hotter. So the mammal is kind of up here near 35, 36 degrees, and this background is significantly colder. 16.9 degrees is the black bits. So radiation is just heat energy travels through space, as electromagnetic radiation. So those are the three types of heat transfer. The first one was, of course, convection, and that is the particles moving up. Conduction is when the heat energy travels from one particle to the next, and radiation is when no particles are involved, it just zips through space, and that is basically how heat transfers, and it can do it, all three can all happen at the same time sometimes. That's all about heat transfer.